Week 1 of the college football season is basically wrapped up. We got one more game tonight between USC and LSU, which should be an absolute fun one. But we got to talk about the top-ranked team in the country right now and ask the question, are they really the best team in the country? And that is the number 1 UGA, Georgia University Bulldogs. Now, they had a dominant win yesterday, 34-3 over the 14th ranked Clemson Tigers, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. All right, the first half was a very disappointing half, honestly, from both teams, but especially the number 1 ranked Bulldogs. This halftime score was 6-0, and that was after a scoreless first quarter, and it was a 6-0 lead for the Georgia Bulldogs going into the locker room. And that 6 points was only 2 field goals. Nothing really happened. A lot of offensive penalties on both sides. Just a lack of discipline. Composure wasn't there. Keep in mind, there was 78,000 in the crowd at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. So basically a home game for the Bulldogs. But still a wild environment. Week 1 of college football, as always, you got some nerves and butterflies. You got to get back in the zone. There's no preseason in college football, so it's all a fresh feel every single year. And so I think both teams kind of weren't getting it together. But to start the second half, Georgia starts it with the ball, goes and scores a touchdown. Clemson returns and scores their first points of the game in a field goal. And so then you thought, okay, maybe there's some life in the Clemson Tigers, and then absolutely not. That's when the Bulldogs took over, dominated, and did their thing. But it was a bleak first half. I don't think the Georgia Bulldogs ran for more than 50 yards in the first half. I don't know. Can't fact check that right now, but it wasn't a good running game performance. They didn't score a single touchdown until that opening possession of the second half, right? And once they did get going, all right, they scored 2 touchdowns in each of the last 2 quarters of the game. But it was rough. I mean, Clemson looked like they were in this dogfight for a large portion of the game until in that start of the fourth quarter, Georgia really blew it open. But, yeah, it wasn't good. It was not good. Both defenses looked really good in the first half. No takeaways, but still looked really good. Still held their ground, did their thing. Again, until Georgia blew it open. But when the Georgia football isn't running the ball very well, that's concerning. Their run game is their bread and butter. It's always been Kirby Smart's bread and butter. All right, we can go back. We can think of some of their past running backs, DeAndre Swift, Todd Gurley, Sonny Michel, whatever. And their national champion teams have dominated on the ground. Right now, it's kind of backwards. They don't have that elite running back. Well, at least they didn't yesterday because of a suspension to Travis Etienne, Trevor's little brother. But Nate Frazier came in the second half and did his thing. But it took a little bit. Branson Robinson was the go-to back in the first half, and he had 7 carries for 12 yards. Yeah, no, that's disappointing for a Georgia offensive line that is supposed to be really good and really dominant in the run game. But Nate Frazier came out in the second half. He finished the game with 11 carries, 83 yards, and a touchdown. He also caught a ball for 24 yards, so he had himself a day, probably making himself RB2 and RB1 as long as Travis Etienne is suspended, because that suspension is indefinite. They didn't really put a timetable on it. So I will cut him a break there because they are missing running back 1, right? But who knows how long? Probably until he's needed. So that's just how it goes with Georgia football. But Carson Beck really came alive. And Carson Beck is the highlight of this offense now. And he did his thing. 278 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. It wasn't the flashiest of games from him, but he did really well getting out of the pocket, dumping it off, finding someone to go make a play. And that happened time and time again. And his 91.7 QBR is a little bit low based off my eye test of watching the game. He looked a little bit better than that, but it still just was not a very clean game from the Bulldogs offense at all, and again, until that second half. So, but that's also a credit to Clemson defense. Clemson is a 14th ranked team in the country for a reason, and their offense didn't really dominate either, right? They didn't really do their thing. Cade Klubnik finished with 0 touchdowns, obviously, because Clemson finished with 0 touchdowns. 142 yards and a pick. A crazy pick by Malachi Stark. Shout out to Malachi for that. But they also didn't rush the football. 47 yards combined between all their guys. They finished with 189 total yards of offense. That is horrible. That's basically what Georgia got through the air. That is horrible. So great job from Georgia defense. Shout out to Michael Williams. Shout out to Malachi Starks. Shout out to that whole defense up front, actually. Shutting down the run was impeccable. Impeccable. Okay, this is a very, very good team. Shout out, what was his name? Jalen Walker. All right, he had a sack and a half. That was crazy. So, yes, this is a really, really well done football game and football team in the second half. But to be the best team in the country, you can't have slow starts like that. You can't have a 6-point half. I guess if your defense plays as well as it did, you can. But not game in and game out, hanging in a tougher, much tougher SEC now that we throw in the likes of Texas, who put up a 52-point shutout on defense as well. So it was against Colorado State, not the Clemson Tigers, but still, that's a very good team. Ole Miss, who put up 76-0. Alabama, who put up 63-0. Okay, you had Miami, who I know I'm getting away from the SEC, but Miami is a team that you got to look out for. Notre Dame put on a show last night, even though it was a rough 3 quarters offensively for both teams in that one, between Notre Dame and the Texas A&M Aggies. But there's a lot of very good college football teams. So after week 1, I can't call Georgia the best team in college football. Well, I think they get back to their, yeah. Once they get some continuity, once they get Travis Etienne back, once they get that offense rolling, it might take a couple games. Let's see, who does Georgia play next? I think this is a big question. That's going to really help. Okay, they've got some tune-up game. They got a tune-up game next week against Tennessee Tech. So that is where their offense should go put up 76-0, like Ole Miss did. But then they have some tough games here. They got Kentucky, they got Alabama, they got Auburn, Mississippi State, and what is that? Week 6, week 7, they've got the number 4 ranked Texas. Follow that with a trip to follow that with a home game, and that's in Texas. That's in Austin. Then the Florida Gators come to town, and then right after that, you got Ole Miss. So you could even call the Florida Gators a little bit of a trap game between the number 4 ranked Longhorns and the number 6 ranked Rebels. Okay, so it's not easy going, but this tune-up game against Tennessee Tech next week should be huge for the Bulldogs. So are they the number 1 ranked team in the country? Of course. Did they look the best yesterday? No. But let's not overreact, man. It is week 1 of college football. Week 1 doesn't always go according to plan. And they did beat. They had one of the best games yesterday, all right? They had one of the best competitions for a top-ranked team, right? The only other close second was the 7th-ranked Notre Dame Irish going up against the 20th Texas A&M Aggies or whatever it was, right? There wasn't a lot of ranked matchups. There never is week 1. But this rivalry, and it's a rivalry. You got to throw that in there. Rivalries are always more difficult in college football. It's always a closer game than it should be. And even though this wasn't really a close game at the end of it, it had that rivalry feel for the first half. And so Bulldogs, they went through a little adversity. It's only going to make them better. They are still my favorite as the best team in college football. But watch out for Ole Miss. Watch out for the Hurricanes of Miami. Watch out for the Longhorns. They looked really, really dominant. But it's just week 1. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you worried about Georgia? Are you worried about any of these other teams that I just mentioned, passing them? Who do you have winning the national championship this year? I'll be in the comments.